Nigerian authorities. It seems to be getting worse and worse.
It does seem to be getting worse, and MTN bringing out the big guns, sending their most senior people to Nigeria to try to resolve this, might in fact have the opposite effect, because Nigeria sees South Africa as trying to pull their weight in a country where they are trying to prove that they in fact the big boys on the continent. The big issue of Nigeria becoming the biggest GDP in Africa is a kind of shadow hanging over this. It's not directly related, but Nigeria calculated their GDP to show that they'd become the biggest economy in Africa, taking over from South Africa. And that was a big ego issue as a country, a kind of national ego debate about which is the biggest economy. So now we come along and say, you guys should actually cut the fine that you're imposing on us, which is a fair enough argument, but coming in that environment might be seen as problematic. Of course, they do need to send their most senior staff to deal with an issue like this.
The fine is astronomical by all accounts. Apparently, the regulator's own budget, the Communications Commission, will be dwarfed by this fine. So it does seem quite provocative, if that is the word. Do you agree?
There's quite a few sides to it. It's certainly an attempt to show their muscle and to also almost pull rank on South Africa, to say, you South Africans think that you dominate this continent, you come in here, we'll show you who's boss. That does seem to be an element of it. It does seem to be a national ego at work, but from MTN's side, there also seems to be ego at play, corporate ego. If you try to answer that question, why didn't they cut off those unregistered SIM cards? One of the answers seems to be that at the time that they were required to register all the SIM cards, their subscriber base was around the 50 million mark or below that. So cutting off 5.1 million SIM cards would cut their subscriber base by more than 10%. And they didn't want to be seen to be taking such a big knock in terms of number of subscribers. Now the number is past the 60 million mark, around 62 million. And cutting off 5 million is not as big a knock anymore. It's below that magic 10% mark. So they would still have more than 55 million subscribers. So it seems to be easier to have done it now than 2 years ago. So they haven't given any better explanation for why they delayed, and therefore does it look like corporate greed? They didn't want to take the knock, like you say. It seems more like corporate ego than corporate greed, because what they were making from those SIM cards was minimal relative to any fine that might have been imposed. In fact, there was an earlier fine, a much smaller fine imposed at the beginning of September on all four of the major networks, which was higher than what they make in revenue from these unregistered SIM cards, because they're such low value SIM cards. But that's exactly the reason why these are SIM cards that are more likely to be used during criminal activities. They're not. There was a report that came out from the BBC, for example, that an unregistered MTN SIM card was used during ransom demands after the kidnapping of a former finance minister. And some are speculating that was the final straw. This is just evidence that unregistered SIM cards are being used by criminals in the pursuit of their activities.
Sure. So a very costly mistake for MTN. We don't know where the fine will land up, but they haven't given a good reason why they didn't cut off earlier. They also just haven't communicated generally around the negotiations, and it is tricky because they obviously don't want to inflame the situation further. But do you agree with me that has been a huge mistake? I think people are still confused about the fine, about what's going on in Nigeria. They issued a SEN statement today just saying be cautious of reports. There's still uncertainty, and that was a very bland statement today.
There's no question that there's a disconnect in MTN's corporate culture relative to quite a few categories of stakeholder. So one category is the consumer. You hear MTN, for example, calling on the regulator to investigate WhatsApp, which is the most consumer-friendly service that has yet emerged for mobile users. That suggests that they're not in tune with the consumer. Then they're not communicating effectively enough with investors when it comes to what's happening to the share price and the negotiations. What they're telling the investor is what the investor would assume anyway. We continue to negotiate. Of course they would continue to negotiate. We all know that. So there's a disconnect in investor relations as well. We find the same in their relationship with the authorities in Nigeria. The fact that they delayed so long shows a disconnect in their relationship with the regulator. And you see that across the board, there's kind of disconnect in corporate culture.
Okay, so this is incredible because it sounds like they're just scoring own goal after own goal. Do you think MTN, some people are saying the magnitude of this fine, if it's imposed in full, is just devastating? What are the implications here for the company?
Well, we've already seen some of the implications from an investor point of view, where something like 80 billion rand has been knocked off the value of
which is
the
even
share.
More than the fine. So,
which is higher than the fine.
Double whammy.
Exactly. And if the fine does get fully imposed, you'll probably see the share price drop even further, because it's not only the value of the company right now, but what it means for the next few years as they try to recover from this loss. It's about 3 years worth of profits suddenly gobbled up.
Sure.
And that makes investors incredibly skittish. Add all these other issues as well, coming on the back of the labor problems earlier this year, instability in terms of, or discontinuity in terms of leadership. And then you have the Iran debacle as well behind us. The battles with Turkcell, who accused them of bribery, and then the issues of trying to get money out of Iran when sanctions had been imposed on the country. All of that, you combine it, that adds up to making investors increasingly skittish, and this was the final straw.
Okay, so final question. This relates to BEE's Akele shares as well. What do you advise shareholders to do? Wait for clarity or get out? I don't know if you can give that.
I wouldn't dream of advising shareholders, but what I can say is that the shareholders would be incredibly nervous of MTN right now.
And what should MTN do to make this right?
MTN needs to revisit their attitude to all their stakeholders, from consumers to investors to regulators and the like, and they need to try to fix their relationship and stop being the big boys in town.
Thank you so much, Arthur Goldstuck from Worldwide Works. And let's move away from MTN. It's a big story. We'll keep following it for you. It will unfold for coming days as well. In other business